we ask each of the panelists to share a high-level view on this briefly, let me share our views, because we published a blog article just a few weeks ago on this very topic. Of course, we couldn't stay behind. I mean, we've been advocating technology innovation in the translation space for 15 years or so. We were pushing for machine translation when most people were not ready for that yet, you know. So we're known as techno-optimists in general in this space, and yet we're a little cautious this time. We feel like it's a little overdone, you know, this talk about this fantastic new large language models and ChatGPT and what have you. We're a bit more conservative. Well, let me say this. I'm speaking for myself. I may not be speaking on behalf of the rest of the TAUS team and of Amir. You'll hear his view in a moment. But here is what I'm thinking. You know, there isn't essentially that much really big news here. It's just that the size of what we're doing, the massive size of data that we're now able to use to train models, and as well the enormous infrastructure that's being deployed to do these trainings. That is what's new, but there is no real breakthrough technology. The machines are still simply copying and mimicking what we humans are doing. They're not humans yet. They're not awfully creative. So what we still need to do is what we've been preaching at TAUS for a long time, right? The language data network. We need to work our data. We need to be very smart in our data preparation to optimize our own engines, to make them work better and to make them stand out in this very big field of, you know, generic engines. So I think, you know, we would have been much better off if there was a more evolutionary development instead of all this disruptive, revolutionary announcements that hit us every day now, and that lead to confusion and chaos, and people even perhaps firing people and dropping their programs that they've just been able to set up to embrace machine translation and make it work well within their own organizations. Lots of disruption in our field, and I pity that. I regret that. So anyway, that's my view. It is obviously amazing what's coming out of these large language models. And let's focus on that. Let's talk about, you know, what are the great fits for translation and what are the non-fits for translation. We'll ask every one of the panelists to really elaborate on that. But before we get to that, we want to ask a snapshot from each of you. Where do you stand? Are you on the side of this group of, what was it, 200 or so leaders in the space that say, let's take a 6-month break now and do nothing because it's dangerous? Or are you really on the optimistic side and say, no, let's speed ahead, you know, because we need to get the maximum value out of all this right away, as soon as possible? So that is the question, a 1 or 2 minute sort of perspective before we dig into the heart of this webinar and talk about the examples of fits and non-fits. Yeah, let me start with you, João, if you want to share your perspective high level.
Sure. I mean, so first of all, I don't believe that even if you wanted, you could stop research for 6 months. It's out there, everybody's using, so that's a moot point. I think that was more to make a stand than for anything else. I do think that this technology is revolutionary. Maybe the impacts on translation are not that revolutionary yet, but everything else is, like all the prompting and the way that you train these models. And I think that we're still trying to understand exactly the capability that these models have. So there is some things that the models do that we're not completely sure how they do, and now you see that they can start using APIs and interacting with each other. So I believe that we need to iterate. So we need to learn, see what comes out, improve the models, and be aware that they're very powerful machines, the most powerful that we ever had. So yeah, we need to go fast, but it's not about just building bigger models, like understanding how they work, what we can do with them, where are the flaws and the pitfalls, and keep working as a community.
All right. That's your opening statement. Sarah, what's your view, high level?
I also think calling for well, it's fine to call for a freeze as an idealistic statement, but I think it's unrealistic that one's actually going to happen. There's too much momentum happening in this space and too much interest from people at large. I think right now with generative AI LLMs, a lot of the interest in that is the breadth and diversity of things that they can do, interestingly, which leads to a lot of people experimenting with them. In the realm of machine translation, it's a specific area. And so you will see that you'll start with those models, and then people will start to narrow in how to work with them for this use case. And you'll probably see them, diverging, converging back to what machine translation looks like. But where they do different things better, that's where we'll see improvements in the industry.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Well, let me just hop up to Amir now, if you want to share your perspective.
Yeah. So my perspective is not far from what you said, Jaap. So you should not have to worry about that. But actually, I'm more excited about the overall use cases of the large language models and the outcomes of it, and where we can fit in this food chain, if I have to say. Because as a small company, we don't have the resources to train the large models. But now with all the models that are coming out and being accessible, we have this, we can actually play around with that. And that's more exciting for me, that actually we can take these large language models and adapt that with a smaller amount of data, which is also exciting part, that you can just use a smaller amount of data to adapt it for a specific task, may it be machine translation. And that opens a lot of new avenues for TAUS, especially to generate these new data sets, to generate human feedback data sets, and then feedback into the system and be part of this this change that we are expecting that soon going to happen, that all the different tasks will going to be using these powerful language models. So I think in that sense, I'm very optimistic that there is a lot of new business that will going to be generated through these models.
Yeah, great. Well, Christian, many of us have heard you speaking on Slater Pod, so yeah, that was really interesting. But please share your perspective here too.
Yes, should we stop? I don't think, as the other panelists don't do, that's even possible. I mean, the moment you start agreeing on stopping, somebody will just keep going, right? So we should maybe stop the hype. And okay, that helps everybody catch a breath and investigate more deeply what these new large language models and GAI actually mean and result. I mean, there's tons of new challenges, lots of stuff where they could work well, where they may not work well. For MT specifically, integration costs and deployment costs comes to mind. So we are entering a hybrid age of marrying the old and the new and figuring out how that could work out. Stopping is, I don't think, a good option, and we just instead have to figure out what can we do with that, right? I mean, it's similar to this age-old decade or ago scenario where suddenly we talked about SMT being maybe augmented or replaced by NMT. We survived that. This is a next step on that quality ladder, and no stopping, just maybe treading more carefully.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, and then our two, well, we introduce you both as startups, but I know, Frederik, you're just kind of restarting up, your existing business, but you saw a fantastic opportunity here. So it's probably clear what your perspective is, but please share it.
Yeah, I think that, so first of all, I think, I mean, basically agree with the rest. I know it's boring, but I'm agreeing with the rest of the panel in matter of calling for a freeze. It's just not realistic. I think it would be great to have some kind of general laws requirements on how to utilize the models. It will require some global actions, which probably would be a bit difficult in the current macroeconomics. But that is kind of like how I see it. On the other hand, on the whole kind of hype around ChatGPT, what I think is super interesting here is, and also what I think or believe that we should think about in the localization industry, is that GPT-3 have been around since 2020. So it's not a brand new technology. What is brand new is that it has been packaged in a chat and made it available for everyone else in the world to actually utilize those models, and that shows the power of the models. So in this sense, the takeaway would be, how are we packaging those technologies towards the customers to make them utilize the technologies and benefiting from it? Because we are looking into a revolution when it comes to translation processes, at least from my perspective.
Yeah. Thanks, Frederik. Last but not least, Jago, you found enough excitement in all of this to start a new company.
Yeah, and that's
After
why
you had TAUS, and then you spent some time on the corporate side, and yeah, but not satisfying, right?
Yeah, no, so that probably tells us well that they see this as an opportunity, and probably it doesn't make sense to stop, or we can ask to stop it and then create a new company and develop for 6 months until while everyone is stopped. No, so I think to add what panelists have said, probably the main questions for me are who's in control, and therefore everyone is talking about OpenAI, and that opens up a lot of possibilities, and that's great. But there are many other large language models, and then we have these possibilities that Amir said about the smaller models that you can fine tune and use. Those open up a lot of opportunities in the business scenario, and I think that's very, very relevant. And then also probably thinking more longer term, what are the changes, and we'll discuss that later, I guess. What are the changes that will the industry not suffer, but exploit? No? Because maybe some things that we were translating or machine translating don't need machine translation anymore, and it could be something different. And this will probably increase the creativity in our vertical and our sector quite a lot. So instead of taking and just believing what everyone is saying in this peak of inflated expectations, let's find the real business scenarios. Let's try to apply it properly, make the best use of it. People won't disappear. People will be much more powerful, but we need to do it well.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. And I think that the summary here is that nobody wants to stop. You know, we can't stop. It's impossible. But if we could, we should stop the hype, as Christian was saying. You know, I don't know which newspapers or channels you're reading, but you know, every day it makes the headlines and the things that I'm reading. And that must create some kind of anxiety in the world, like, you know, don't miss the boat. You know, if you don't embrace this now, you lost it. You know, and that's kind of scary in a way. Anyway, thank you all as an opening. And in terms of what the agenda now is, the core of the webinar is to get everybody's view on where do you see a perfect fit now. Come up with examples. You know, how does it help us in the translation space, and also give us examples where it definitely doesn't fit, you know, where it doesn't help. So we'll go around and ask everybody to give those examples and elaborate on that a little longer. We don't need to necessarily have everyone just go down the list. We may hop from one panelist to another to keep it, make it a bit more lively. And after that section, we'll end with predictions. You know, where do you see the next 6 months? You know, where are we heading? So the fits and the unfits for translation of the large language models of generative AI. let me start with Sarah, if I may.
Sure.
Where do you see perfect fit in your environment?
Yeah, well, I mean, finding perfect fits, I think, will require some experimentation like we can work as providers and vendors of models on finding exposing the right fits. But there's so much variety in customer content that the fit has to be on their side as well. And so areas where I think there are opportunities are in the vein of long form content when you're getting into multi-sentence translation, maintaining more of that context across sentences. I think for right now, what we're seeing is still going to stay in the high resource languages. I think there's been a number of articles in press that talk about potential for hallucinations being higher or critical errors being higher as soon as you get outside of the core European APAC languages. And so areas of sensitive content, confidential content, like anything that gets into that space customers are going to be more cautious on those scenarios. And you'd want to have human in the loop for that, reviewers for that type of content. Where I think it'll be actually a little slower is on some of the pretty high volume cases for machine translation today, which is things that are like single sentence, very quick turn, user generated content is latency sensitive and QPS sensitive. And the LLMs are just not there yet today. They might get there, as the industry continues to invest in it, but a level of infrastructure, compute, everything like that, that's gonna be a slower road.
All right. Good. Let me just suggest to everybody, by the way, on the call, on the webinar here, to jump in if you have a question for Sarah or for anybody else to clarify or to where you don't agree, that just go ahead and speak up. But Sarah, that's ending your list for now, is it?
I guess one other area that I think has been also brought up before is when you're kind of skipping over MT and just going into generating new content for localization or in the transcreation space. And I think that is also interesting and will take experimentation to figure out the right path for that, because that hasn't been an area of machine translation in the past.
That's right. Yeah. All right.
And if I may just actually add on that, because I think that is the really interesting aspect, because it seems like everyone is focusing a lot to fix translation like machine translation, but what we see from our customers, and I basically said it on our yearly kickoff meeting to the whole company. I said we'll probably see in a year that our customers will convert into generating content on product text, etc., for e-commerce, for instance. But what we saw in 2 months were what we expected to happen in a year. So the change is so rapidly, and from our predictions is that, are we actually gonna translate that much volume any longer, or are we gonna generate the content in native language? Because that is especially where, at least from what we have tested out and the feedback we got from our customers, is that it's actually really good at making local content. And then adding in copywriters in the loop to modify it and then train on that basis. And eventually you would be able to use the same data set to do machine translation. So you kind of like kill 2 birds with 1 stone from our perspective, at least. So I think, I think it's a really, really interesting area. And that is where I see that the things might change dramatically and probably quicker than we expect.
Yeah. That's
And
interesting. Yeah, Jaap.
I agree with Sarah and Frederik have said, and I'm saying that as well. And what is interesting that GPT-4 versus GPT-3, for instance, the quality that you get for not low resource languages, but with let's say a smaller, bigger languages is significant. I mean, you perceive the much higher quality. So this quality, if you even do fine-tuning or future learning, it even improves more. So I think the opportunity is there. And I think, as Frederik was saying, being able to create in language, that will be an interesting way of delivering more or being able to do more, I think. So maybe there is a combination of services that involves a lot of different variations of trying to achieve the same goal, which in e-commerce is trying to sell more.
Yeah.
I can add a bit to that. So I think that for translation, it is a good fit. I think these models just out of the box are competitive with the best that we have. And if you think about translation, we have large language models for years. So it's not that just we didn't use large language models. It's just that we use a different kind of training and prompting. And with that, we get really close to like a lot of time that we spend fine-tuning the model. And I think we're just on the beginning. So it's really like, I was surprised. I'm not surprised that frequently that we just a prompt with like very few shots, we kind of replaced all the fine-tuning that we have with a lot of examples, and we need a lot of data from the customer to get the model better. No, you need 3 examples and ChatGPT and you get the same quality, and it can deal much better with terminology. So it is revolutionary. I just think it's one more model. And I agree with Christian that it's just the beginning. It's like we still kind of try to justify that they're not good like we used to do with SMT. But I guess in 2 years, no one is going to be talking and anything else besides these models for translation. Now, I think the most interesting part is not translation, because that's already very good. And so it's on pair. But on translation, we already had a lot of parallel data, a lot of understanding of training these models. Other tasks we didn't. And this is where this comes from 0 to like 90% very quickly. So for instance, like image translation, taking like the text of the image and putting it there translated, formatting, localization of entities, all these things that used to be super complex and people built pipelines or didn't address them at all. Nowadays, you can get one person with a prompt making things that are amazing. And this for me is what I think that what's coming up is like everyone trying to adopt this in very different situations. And it's a question of productizing. So that's going to be very exciting. I also like, I've heard a lot of people talking about this as generation in different languages. I kind of see that it's kind of the same as translation. It's like document level translation. You might not see the steps, but it's kind of similar. I think one of the biggest challenges, like we're making the difficulty that we have on translation one step harder. So the biggest difficulty in translation is quality estimation, is understanding the quality, because no one knows. And like you're generating an article for Japanese, good luck if you don't know Japanese. On translation, because it was segment level, we kind of understood what to look at and so on. If you're now generating from scratch, you have no idea how those things align, if they're actually talking about the same thing. So you're making a very hard problem 10 times harder, but if people want it, let's do it. But you'll need a human to go there and check, or you need like other technology to look at it. But it's definitely going to be very exciting.
Yeah.
I think
see you're laughing. Sorry, may I switch to Christian? Because you were laughing. Can you jump in?
Yes, making a problem 10 times harder, and then you ask for it, we do it. That's good. It also keeps us employed because it raises tons of research issues we have to solve. The whole jump from, so is it suitable for MT? Yes, absolutely. It very nicely finally abolishes this segment level thing we have been stuck in for the last decade or 2 or 3. So the whole larger context is super exciting, also much more stressful in terms of latency, as Sarah mentioned. This is a joyful time of figuring out what we can do. I mean, you can do this generation aspect on source side to figure out how to fix your input so that it may have a better chance of being translated by a quote unquote old school NMT system. You can apply it on the target side to make it more like what your customer actually wants. You can sort of mishmash that and create KD knowledge distillation data to train your old school model on top of it, so it is faster. So this is definitely going to be very exciting, and MT will benefit from it. What is true is what João said is for MT, the whole thing is actually not as surprising because we have used similar models and architectures for quite a while now, but for other modalities, it seems they've been like the GPTs have taken the world by storm there, right? Suddenly stuff which last year was, or 2 years back was science fiction, sort of has been deployed, and that is the big hype effect right now.
Yeah, that's right. And Christian, did it change things at Microsoft already fundamentally? The large language models, have you? So
you might have heard
to the extent that you can talk about that. I mean, did it change organization, process, the core of what you're doing.
I can talk about the fact that visibly we have made a huge investment. I mean that is no secret, and that also means that the internal direction, of course, has a very strong large language model bias. In our case, GPT bias. So has it changed translator itself just yet? It started to, yes. I mean, we are exploring different things where this may help. Customization comes to mind, data expansion comes to mind. Nothing which is just out there yet, but you've seen the amount of co-pilots Microsoft has recently released, right? I mean, there's it seems an X co-pilot for everything now, and those are all good use cases. I mean, the whole concept of a co-pilot is actually is a good branding of the whole thing, because you get an assistant who feeds into whatever you are doing and you are driving, and that entity helps you achieve your goal better, faster, or at a higher quality. That is a positive outlook towards the large language model enabled future, right? I mean, I like that notion as a concept, and obviously within Translator we are trying to see how we can use that. Coming back to Sarah's point on latency, that also is a big thing, right? I mean, if we just now switched everything over to GPT, we would likely have respectable quality for the top languages. We would get into some pickle for the medium-sized languages. I would be in a problematic situation for shipping all those long-tail, ultra-low resource languages. And it might simply be 10x or even more expensive than what we currently have. So there's optimization work to be done.
Right, yeah. Well, let me switch to Amir. Has it changed the large language models, anything at TAUS in your company?
Yeah, I think because from the last couple of years, we were trying to do this customization of MT, and we believe that MT reached to a stage where the generic models are good, but not good enough for specific domains. So we were just focusing on that. But suddenly this whole ChatGPT thing has disrupted this thing. So now we have to see where things are moving. But as everyone mentioned, that right now it's not suitable to just replace the old machine translation technology, because it's not feasible in terms of cost and handling the volumes as well. If you are just querying ChatGPT, it's right now slow. Compared to the volume is not that much compared to translation volume, but still it's unable to produce the latency there. So that's number one. But then also I've seen lots of people are already comparing ChatGPT versus traditional translation and trying to figure out which has better quality. And we can see that there are still fair share of mistakes that these large language models are making. And of course, because it's a much harder problem to do translation. But also maybe it's a slightly unfair comparison, because ChatGPT is not particularly specifically trained to do translation. So maybe if we want to train just for translation task, maybe it will do much better. But then it's again super expensive to just train a model for translation. If we just use OpenAI API, that's too expensive. We can train on Microsoft or Google a model with just 300, 400 euros, and that performs very good. So that's something is still going to be there. And then also for us, I think the biggest change that it can bring is data generation. And we can quickly generate and facilitate the human workers in a better way to basically generate much better data and bigger volumes of data, specifically for different domains. And that can facilitate the current model training much better and current adaptation much better. So we are looking into this direction.
Right, yeah. Thanks, Amir.
The generation case is an interesting.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, the data generation case is an interesting one, because I think it'll still be, you still have the need for a, particularly if you're using it for machine translation, you still have the need for having the source target attach rate. So like, how do you would need to do pretty careful review of that to ensure you're not introducing errors into custom translation, and so that it's structured to be similar to a source target like machine translation provides. Generative is not as declarative and one-for-one. That's part of why the quality issue or quality challenge of how do you evaluate is a harder thing for us to go after. So I think the data generation thing is interesting, but that part of the problem needs to be looked at.
Interesting, but challenging. Yeah. Any feedback on that, Amir? Or?
Yeah, I think for us, because a lot of the times that companies come to us and ask for a specific domain data sets. And sometimes we don't even have the source data to do the manual translation. And in that aspect, it's very good that you can actually give a scenario to ChatGPT or any large language model, and it can generate a full volume of source data. And then you can do corrections on that by humans and generate maybe the translations of that, and then feed back into the current models. And that could really work well and speed up things. And then also you can do quality estimation of different human tasks on top of that to facilitate the quality of human workers. And that could also facilitate a lot. So I think it's useful. It's all about how you can utilize the power.
So, João, back to you. Have the large language models, ChatGPT, already entered your core sort of architecture? Have you changed your total setup there at Unbabel, or is that too much to ask? Is it kind of a trade secret?
No. Honestly, I think on AI, there's not a lot of trade secrets. It has. So I think like everyone else, and I can jump to the prediction. Everyone is adopting these models, so we internally are using them, or we're trying with them and starting to use them for translation. A few shots, terminology, they're super good, and I think they're going to keep evolving. Document level is something that we need to learn how to use. We need to make them reliable, because when they fail, we need to be able to understand that they fail. For quality estimation and evaluation, we're also using them. I mean, quality estimation is something that we've been working a lot. I don't think that these models are on pair, but they do like different things that what we used to have do, like suggesting answers that are very good for cat tools. So, and definitely we're playing a lot with these models for all the other small bits and pieces of the pipeline that need to be added. So that's something that we're pushing on the product. In fact, I think that what we're going to see over the next year on the localization industry is a race to add all these kinds of bits and pieces of modules to the pipeline and allow people to use them and configure them. So that's going to be super interesting. I don't think that we're going to see like jobs being killed or empty programs being shut down, because honestly, we've been claiming human parity on translation since 2013. Some people here have been part of the teams that have claimed human parity. I don't think that solves the end-to-end translation problem. I think we are following a trend that has been happening, which is there is more content that either machine translation is good enough for the purpose, or the requirement human effort is much smaller. And that's where I think tools like you is important. I think we're going to see a paradigm shift on the post edition. So instead of like the translator seeing every single segment, it's more kind of like nitpicking where the errors might be, because most of it is going to be correct. I also think that a lot of people, ourselves, we have a lot of work changing their tools, because the one-to-one segment might go away. So there's going to be some interesting implementation work that we need to do, but that's going to be super interesting. And in general, I think like killing empty programs nowadays, my honest opinion is that the only reason that anyone would develop their own MT is either for security concerns, because you can do domain adaptation on Google or Microsoft with the customer data, or for cost reasons. Because it's not that like, if anyone tells you that they're going to train an empty model that is far better than Google or Microsoft having the same data, I'll call that something else. So and I think that's what we're going to change. So there's ways that you can train large language models and make them much smaller. You just saw the Stanford paper, and have them in-house. That is going to help on like the security if there's a point, or on the cost. but not that if anyone claimed I'm going to have an empty model whose quality is much superior to everyone else, nowadays, I don't buy it. In terms of the industry, I think we're going to be working a lot on making the models smaller and faster. Those are very important, and you can see a lot of papers on that. And definitely a lot on the alignment with models, like the quality, bias, not so much for translation, but for other areas. I think that's like a very top of mind for these large language models. And I think it's going to be very exciting. I don't think we can predict 6 months. We can predict 2 weeks, but we'll see about that.
Well, indeed, Joe, you jumped ahead and started the predictions. We were not there yet, I think, but it's good. We'll remember what you said. But in the round, talking about where are the real fits and unfits, I think overall we were quite positive, and talked about the fits. We mentioned a couple of things that may not be so positive, the unfits. Talk about latency, cost, customization, the top languages. So let me just quickly ask the others here too. I mean, are these sort of real problems? Like the large language models cover what, 10 to 20 languages. So what about of course the big agenda in the world, inclusion and diversity, and reaching the last human on the planet and speaking their own language. How do we solve that in this environment? For instance, are the large language models going to help us there? Anyone?
Yes. These things are now available general purpose tools, and it's on us as a human intelligence holder to figure out a way of utilizing them, right? Building low resource long tail languages is not something which a large language model gives you out of the box. If it has never seen that language, which only like 5 people speak on this planet, it has no chance of learning it or knowing anything about it, right? You can't be a stochastic parrot if you have never seen any examples. But that doesn't mean that you cannot, as a human, try to use LLMs to, given some monolingual data, augment that data and make it bigger. One interesting thing which Sam Altman seems to have said earlier this week at MIT was that the age of these like hyper large language models is already over, and we're now focusing more on how can we leverage that information which we have better, right? I mean, maybe that's the counter movement, now figuring out how can you learn more out of less. And that would then nicely fit for all these low resource scenarios.
Yeah. And what about customization? Is this all going to be solved through this prompt engineering and telling the large language models what to do, which domain to focus on, or do we still have a role to play for the customization features in Microsoft, Google, Amazon? What do you think, Sarah?
I think there will be. So in terms of how quickly custom translation will change, there's still the factor of like how cautious a lot of the companies that use custom translation or would want to use custom translation are, as their mainstay. So that is one factor for it. The LLMs certainly present that you can do domain tuning with less data, still using prompts, but so I think there will be shifts due to that.
Yeah.
So can I add something there? Because I think prompting is very interesting in a way that it allows us to give the clarity information to the model. And I remember like a long time ago on my PhD, it was all about adding the clarity information to statistical models. And I remember something that my advisor back then said, who's now at Google, that every time you can give like some declarative information, it's basically very compact information for the model. So you need a lot of training examples to give the same information that you can give with one declaration. And if you think about when you go to a prompt and say, this domain is medical, how much training, the parallel training data would you have to give to the model and fine tune, because all you're doing is like iterate over that for it to be able to pick up that what you're trying to say to him is that the domain is medical, and sub-select the data from the training that he should focus his attention on. And now you can do it with just one sentence. This is for medical. This is the magic. This is why a lot of the stuff that needed a lot of training data, now with one declaration, you can have exactly the same effect because you're telling exactly what all the 100,000 segments were trying to say. The same thing with terminology. Instead of passing it like sentences with terminology or trying to hack the model, you're saying, look, use this word instead of this word on this context. That is worth I don't know how many gazillion of training examples. So what I think is, I mean, I can give you the example of Unbabel that we used to order like the hundreds of thousands parallel training sentences per customer to get the level of adaptation. That was because we were very dumb on the way that we did adaptation. We're just saying iterate over this data and learn something that I'm not going to tell you what it is. I can now tell him exactly what it is and provide the exact example. So I think we're still going to get some gains from adaptation. I don't think that prompt is going to be the final player. There's going to be fine-tuning as well. But I also think we shouldn't be dismissive of the power that prompting has. It's like it's a way to give the clarity, very fine-grained information to a model as opposed to just something data and asking to learn by itself.
Probably the main challenge there is in domains or verticals where there is not a lot of publicly available data and where you would need really a personalized large language model or fine-tune large language model so that you really can gather that data, because there is a lot of data that is not on the public internet, and all these models have been trained on that, and that's where the value can also be, I think. So, but I think that one question very important here that has come up is really quality of the data. And in this reinforcement learning with human feedback, in the end, what you want to do is to improve based on actually good data. And data will be more and more important, I would say.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, let's move to the predictions then. João, you had your turn already, but Christian, in another interview recently, you said perhaps in a few months we'll hit a brick wall, and we will kind of redefine our research agenda. Learn about stuff that we haven't figured out very well yet. Can you elaborate on that? What are your predictions?
Well, I mean, it's the same as when we moved from SMT to NMT, right? Initially, there was something new. We slapped it on top of our SMT models so that there was a neural model as part of that SMT thing. And then there was hype, then stuff didn't work. And then we spent the last years figuring out how neural architectures outperform the old stuff. And the same here. Right now, from my personal feeling, the hype level is just too much. I mean, there's, as you said, it's everywhere. And if like grandparent generation people talk to you about GPT and how that saves the world, it's a little bit, maybe a little over the top. Right. So that that brick wall suggestion is just me smirking and saying, look, at some point, overbearing expectations will fall flat on your face. Like, you don't run a marathon without training and then achieve it. Eventually you run out of air and hit that wall there as well, right? So what will happen then is we will at that point in time have identified a couple of cheap and easy integrations, like very shallow hybrid combinations of old and new tech, and have figured out how that works. A lot of scenarios seem super low-hanging fruit, so there's a good chance that stuff works out nicely just by adding a little bit of this large language model magic on top, and we should try to reap those low-hanging fruit gains as soon as possible. And then for anything where we hit that brick wall of mine, it's like, yes, identify what is the problem. We may see a small slump in general craze about AI, but this is where we will pick up the pieces, identify how do we get to the next thing. Is it few-shot learning? Is it fine-tuning? Is it chain of thought? Is it knowledge distillation in some funky way? You name it, we will try it. And then from that, based on that, we will do the next little step function. So,
right. 3 months, 6 months, when we will hit that wall?
For which of the various bits? Brick wall depends a little bit on how much more people blow up the whole thing, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's like the self-driving car example. Everybody believed fully self-driving is basically imminent. It has been sold to the market, and now years later, it's like, oh, well, it still doesn't work, and we might not actually call it like that anymore because it's misleading.
Yeah.
I don't know. These cycles are the length is not necessarily easy to predict. 6 months.
Okay.
But in the meantime, we will, all of us collectively will be racing like mad to figure out how can we use it, how can we optimize it. The example about cost and latency, I mean, this is what happened over the last 2-5 years for all the neural frameworks, right? There has been a lot of progress across the various big players who fund these architecture, open source projects to make stuff faster and more accessible, so they can reap in the benefits. This will happen the same year. And maybe for the prompting, an interesting question there is, how can we make this, say, more quote unquote principled? I mean, there's one, prompt hacking is sort of maybe the current nascent state of things. It would be really nice if eventually that turned into a more, something which can be optimized using actual optimization techniques. So that's the exciting bit, I guess, my prediction.
Yeah. Thanks, Christian. Sarah, by the way, in a few minutes, we'll look at the questions. We have lots of questions, I think, so we'll get some questions from the audience, but quickly finish this round on predictions. Sarah, what is your high-level expectation here with all the hype? Will come to an end, or and then what?
Yeah. I think there's broad hype, and then there's the hype where it is centered around machine translation. So if I'm just talking about the second one, because I think the first one can actually go on for quite a while because there's so many different things you can do with it. People find new things and then get excited about it. But on the machine translation space, I think the interest in it will be rapid but narrowly implemented for a little while, because you'll have the high resource languages and it'll apply to like some specific use cases until we solve the compute QPS latency issues. And then it'll become, as I said, I think in order to solve those issues, it'll start to look more like how machine translation is implemented, because in order to solve that, you have to get the models down, you have to narrow them in some ways. And I think you'll start to merge back to how things look today. Yeah. With higher quality.
Yeah. Okay. Frederik, yes. You're muted.
Sorry. May I just add, because I think actually we have talked about a lot about quality of both GPT and the different machine translation engines. And what we have seen is that we see that machine translation have been brilliant for a long time. And especially if you train it with quality data, you get, I mean, really good outputs, and often good enough outputs to replace specific content types of your translation process. What the problem has been here is that the customers, they are not confident in machine translation in the same way. And I think that is probably what we are underestimating here, is that the customer's mindset have shifted when it comes to ChatGPT. They believe in it with everything. I mean, and I think that is just, that is just the truth. And I think that a little agency in Denmark wrote to me that he had a couple of customers and 95% of the content is now generated by AI, and they are reviewing 5% of it for facts and others. And I just think that this year might go extremely quickly, because if this is the trend that our customers and users is moving towards, because they are generating content for everything else anyway, I just think that it will kind of like, no matter how good the quality for machine translation or how good the quality is for generative content, I think it narrows down to the use case of the customers and how they would prefer to actually work with their content in general, no matter of language. And here, I think that also what João mentioned is the models is learning extremely quickly. So by adding humans in the loop in the beginning, either to expand some kind of, if you would say, content foundation for a specific customer, to create tone of voice, etc., it will improve dramatically in the outputs for the specific customers. And I think for my prediction, we are heavily kind of like working in that direction together with providing custom machine translation, because we would like to be broad, but we just don't want to be behind on this one because the change is coming way quicker than I ever could have imagined.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Frederik. Just quickly, two more people with a prediction. Amir, what's your message for everybody to take away?
Yeah, I think it's nice to hear one thing, that the quality data is not going away. So the need of the data is there, and we are not going out of business soon. So that's very very good. But I think the translation is just a small part of this whole large language model realm, and there are lots of other tasks that it can perform, and that's more exciting, and people are really quickly adapting that. That was really shocking, that the way people have really taken this and so quickly, and that's can actually create a lot of new scenarios for all the researchers and us as well. So the technology is not going anywhere; it's going to stay, and we will going to use it in all sort of tasks in daily routine and in our life, and it's already transforming things. So that's really encouraging and interesting and exciting.
Thanks. Jago?
Yeah, and just to add very little things. One thing I think that for creative translation, like e-commerce, e-learning, probably everything will change and shift. Maybe, as we have said, people won't be translating, companies won't be translating, they will be just creating in language. Probably there are things that we haven't discussed, like multimodal generation, like text to video or text to image or image to text, and these type of things that can also provide additional benefits to companies. And then on the other side, there is the regulatory translation, or in regulated industries, where really you need more secure, more precise machine translation engines. Probably those will stay for a while, but as João was saying, for instance, probably translators will really focus only on the critical mistakes that are extremely relevant for that content, and we will be much more productive, and we will be able to do much more with less. So to me, those are the final points I would like to make.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm just now looking at the clock, and we have 2 minutes left. So even opening up the question and answer panel there are lots of questions. It's probably not going to work within those 2 minutes. So let's think about an alternative approach, that we perhaps distribute those questions to the panelists after the webinar and make a nice sort of deliverable out of that that we share with all the participants. Is that workable, Annemai?
For me, but I would say speakers, what do you think? Is that workable for you?
Would you mind answering some questions if we allocate to specifically to some of you?
Indeed.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
I saw a few comments, of course. You know, we at TAUS, we have been advocating machine translation from the very beginning of TAUS, which was in 2005. And of course, we've had that question many, many times: is machine translation making humans obsolete? And now, of course, this question is coming up: is generative AI making MT obsolete? And how can clients sleep well at night if AI is used to translate their content? So just thought maybe if anyone can, or everyone here can just share a yes or no. Is MT becoming obsolete? What is your opinion?
No,
It's not.
It's a unanimous no. It sounds like that. That's good. Well, what I hope, we're right at the end of the webinar now, is that this discussion helped to kind of stop the hype a little bit, or reduce the amount of hype. This was a good, realistic discussion, and I'd like to thank every one of you to join us for joining us here today. And let's just continue our work with a more realistic view on what's possible. Thanks everybody out there in the world for joining us today. Is there any practical information that you need to share, Annemai, at the very end?
we'll share the recording. And I found out that chat was somehow disabled, but you'll also get the survey in your inbox, and it should also pop up actually after closing the webinar. So thank you everyone for joining today, and looking forward to seeing you again soon.
I
Right.
will.
Thanks,
See
everybody.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.